This is MC Fireside Chats, a weekly show devoted to the outdoor hospitality industry, hosted by Brian Searl and Cara Csizmadia. You'll hear from special guests that focus on topics to help your business succeed, all backed by Modern Campground, the most innovative news source in the industry.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl with Insider Perks, here as always with Shane Devenish, who is our new host today because Cara couldn't make it. She's in a meeting for RVDA of Alberta, so Shane has graciously not volunteered to be the host today, but I have nominated him anyways. So welcome, Shane. Thanks for being here with us. But we're super excited to have our RV outdoor recreation show here happening. As always, the fourth week of the month. We've been doing it in 2022. So we've got Eleanore Hamm from RVDA of Canada. We've got Phil Ingrassia back with us, who missed it last month with RVDA of America, just RVDA in general. I don't know, Phil. Like I feel
RVDA
like
US.
All right, RVDA of the US. And then we've got obviously Kurt Repanshek. Did I do that right, Kurt?
No, you got Kurt right.
Kurt. Say it.
Repanshek.
Okay. I told you I wouldn't get that wrong, and then I got it wrong again. So Kurt Repanshek from National Parks Traveler is going to tell us all about some cool things that are happening in the outdoor rec industry and things like that. So really appreciate you all tuning in and being here with us. So where do we want to start today? Let's you know what? Let's start, Shane, with you, since you're the co-host, right? Talk a little bit about the Toronto Spring Camping and Outdoor, or Toronto Spring Camping and RV Show and Sale?
Yes, perfect.
So long. Just come up with a cool acronym for it.
You said that a lot better than Kurt's last name, that's for sure.
Well, it's hard to do worse than butchering somebody's last name. So, but tell us about your show. It just wrapped up as the first in-person RV show that had happened in Canada so far since the beginning of the pandemic, and lots of excitement, things going on. So you want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah, actually, it was the second one. The first one, I think, was out in BC. And then the last one in Moncton, New Brunswick, was just last week. But we were really fortunate to be able to, have the show at, it was hard because at the beginning of January, we were in lockdown and not sure whether we could even, have an event. And then, by the time our event started, which was March 3rd, we were fortunate that cases, for a lot of reasons, the cases started to improve, and then the province opened up to 100% attendance and no proof of vaccination right before the show started. So, we were fortunate that, we didn't have to discriminate anybody. And, people came, they felt safe. We made sure that they were safe. But the most important thing is the dealers sold a lot of product. I can say they sold more product during the show, even though the number of dealers were half. The overall number of units and total retail amount was the highest it's ever been in the history of the show. So I think it was a combination of the guys who had product were the guys that came in, but they had big product. They had bigger units, higher price. So the demand was there certainly for the consumers. And we were really worried about, the inflation and whether there was going to be sticker shock or whatnot. And didn't seem to be, which was pleasantly surprising for us. So overall, Brian, we were, extremely happy with the way things went.
So now let me ask you a question as it relates to, you're talking about the inventory issues and the people who, and the guys who brought in inventory were the bigger units that were more expensive, right? I was at the Calgary Outdoor Adventure Show this past weekend, and we were seeing a lot of those smaller trailers on display, and then obviously that's a different kind of environment, right? You don't have the big show space floor to have the RVs in there. But do you see that, and maybe all of you can chime in and comment on this if you want, do you see that trend that we're hearing about? Is that picking up steam where people want more of these smaller rigs than they do the larger ones?
Yeah, interesting question. Absolutely. And, the feedback after the show is, they were disappointed that there wasn't, more pop-ups and smaller units. As show organizers, and I'd be interested to talk to some of the guys in the U.S., dealers, want to show bigger units at shows. Contrary to what I think the CRVA, what we would like to see, we would like to see a more rounded number of models from smallest to largest at any show. But if a dealer has the exhibit space, they want to have a bigger unit where they can make a bigger margin on it. And versus maybe your outdoor show, Brian, where guys probably don't have the space, so they're showing a smaller unit. We would frankly rather have dealers bring a more diverse selection, but it's sometimes hard to convince.
So let's toss it to Eleanore and Phil, who we have here, right? Phil and Eleanore, what are your thoughts on a variety of units at shows? Does it help? Does it hurt? What are you hearing from your dealers both in the U.S. and Canada?
Well, in the U.S., I think it just depends on the size of the show. For instance, if you're at the Florida RV Super Show in Tampa every year, you'll see everything from teardrops to, the big diesel pushers. Dealers certainly bring a wide variety to that show. In other shows where it's more, real estate is more limited, they certainly will focus on perhaps their most expensive product, because they need to get a lot of people to see those to perhaps move those.
Okay.
It's in our experience, the lower priced models those will have a higher turn rate on the lot. And so when dealers are spending a lot of money on a show, they'll want to put the higher priced units out there. But I do think over the years, especially in the last 5 years, we're seeing a lot more diversity of product, at least here in the U.S.
Yeah, well, it's the same in Canada. Although the shows we haven't had as many shows as there have been in the U.S. I mean, and we would echo Shane's comments that a variety is probably the best for the consumer, right? So they can decide, where they want to go. But when you do see the larger motorized units, which motorized is a smaller segment of the overall industry, but when you do see some of the units, there's also kind of that right, in terms of this is there's some spectacular units out there for people to see, and I think at an RV show it's a little bit different necessarily than the outdoor show. The outdoor show, you may have people that are interested in the outdoors, and they may not necessarily be RVers, right? So they might be more looking, maybe haven't even considered RVing, they're still tenters, and so that entry level product is maybe a better fit for a show like that, to just introduce people to get into the industry, versus if you had a Class A diesel pusher in there, you might be scaring some people away initially.
It's a big jump for your first camper.
Yeah, for your first RV.
Right. Yeah, for your first RV. But in general, are you seeing this trend? Like, when you say entry level, and I completely understand it from an outdoor adventure show, right? Like, it wasn't an RV show. There were only 3 people there. There was a dealer there, but they were clearly focused on that entry level market, like you say. But is it still entry level, or are there more people that are shifting toward, this is what I want, first, second, third, fourth time, versus something bigger? Obviously gas prices has an impact now, but just in general, from a millennial, younger, more people getting into the industry standpoint?
We just did our year-end stats, and the pop-up camper market went up significantly last year. And if we go back, to when when we were young, I can speak maybe. You guys are a lot younger than me, so People had pop-ups. They bought it. That was their first unit, and then they traded it in, and it eventually, built themselves up. We've missed that as an industry. People got away from pop-ups. Certainly in Canada, I think as we lost some manufacturers in the maybe 2010. And manufacturers weren't building them to the extent of what they were before. So hopefully that trend, gets a little bit better and we can get more affordable.
Oh, I think we lost Shane's audio. Shane, we can't hear you anymore.
Well, just to piggyback on what Shane was saying, I think one of the things that I've noticed at U.S. shows is the proliferation of van campers, Type B motorhomes, have really increased in visibility. Certainly that's good news for Canada because a lot of those B vans are produced in Canada. But also in the US, you've seen companies like Winnebago and Thor really get into that market in ways that they weren't 10 years ago. So I think as we look at the whole RV market, there's so much more diversity, I think, on dealer lots and at shows than we had, 10 years ago, because you've got a real strong first-time buyer market coming in, even prior to the pandemic, who tend to gravitate towards the more entry-level, smaller equipment, at least for a first-time purchase. And so, we've got teardrops and things like that, which really were below the noise level when I first got in the RV business. I mean, it was bigger is better all the time. And we've seen the manufacturers and the dealers react to this changing market by really showing a lot more different types of products, both on the lot and at shows.
Yeah, and I'll admit, go ahead, please. Shane.
I was just wondering how the supply chain is impacting things. I mean, you've got these RV shows and they bring out their newest and their biggest and their best. What's the delivery schedule looking like? I mean, last fall, I think I went to look at one of Airstream's new trailers, and they said I think they told me it was six months or 16 months out because they just couldn't manufacture enough. And with supply chain problems, how has that impacted sales and deliveries?
Well, we've been surveying U.S. dealers every month on that, and it's gotten a lot better than even it was 6 months ago. We expect on the travel trailer side, second or maybe early third quarter to be almost back to par as far as quote unquote normal inventory levels in the U.S. Now, motorized is going to be a different story because they're more dependent on obviously the chassis and the chips that the automakers are
struggling with,
expressing the problems with. So, we are seeing on the towable side now certain models, and I think Airstream is one of them. They're backlogged quite a bit further out, but for more, I guess the more entry level stuff, those products are starting to hit dealer lots. And we're getting back to a more normalized inventory level. I don't know what it is up in Canada, Eleanore.
Yeah, it's similar, I would say. Units are coming. I mean, obviously we have the added issue of just ensuring that we can get units across the border, ensuring that we have enough drivers to be able to bring the units up. But I think on the towable side, it seems that dealer inventories in the US are pretty full, and so now dealer towable inventory is going to be, by the time camping season starts, which is probably within the next month or so, is going to be pretty good on the dealers' lots in Canada. We're still seeing the same issues with motorized. Even the Class B manufacturers in Canada, some of them are out a year, maybe two, in terms of having product. And to the point of the Airstream, I mean, you've got some niche markets where it's a very specific product, where dealers are having to basically, like a consumer, you have to put in your order. It's kind of like the Tesla, you'll get it at some point in time when it comes, right? So So hopefully, we've been trying to tell consumers that, if there's really a specific product that you're interested in and you have less flexibility, that, to try to get to a dealership sooner than later to just ensure that you're able to get delivery this year.
Yeah, Kurt, I think it's all expectation. You try to, explain the situation for the customers, and hopefully they, don't get too cranky, when you tell them it's going to be a little bit longer. But, the fact is, if they want a unit, buy today and get it, say 6 months down the road, and you wait a week and it could be longer. So, there's some urgency, I think, to make the decision sooner rather than later. And I think that's what the guys at the shows were telling them. Hey, the sooner you buy it, the sooner you're going to get it. I talked to somebody about the Miami Boat Show, and everything in that show was sold, and they were being told if you wanted to buy a boat, it was 2 years down the road. So, it's just the way things are. You try to get your orders in, and then just wait.
What about the used? What about the used market, if I can interrupt you, Brian? I know 2 years ago when the coronavirus struck and it started, a lot of people are rushing out to buy the RVs. And I've got an RV writer who's been on the road since 2007. And we were speculating that after a year or two, you'd see a lot of those newly purchased RVs coming back onto the used market because the buyers realized that it wasn't their lifestyle.
Well, we've been in the field with some research through Go RVing, and I think a lot of people were thinking that this is just a pandemic purchase, and we're going to trade it in and get back on a cruise ship or hop on a plane to go to Europe or whatever their vacation option that was delayed was. But so far we haven't seen it. Certainly, there's some anecdotal stories about somebody who didn't like it or got into it. But by and large, the people who have bought during the pandemic have enjoyed their experience. Even though we were very concerned about campgrounds, they were able to find campgrounds to use and enjoy their purchase. So at least for now, we haven't seen this mass kind of trade in and trade out type of scenario. And dealers in the U.S. anyway are still beating the bushes for late model used. So there's a lot of activity out there of dealers, really trying to find used units to stock. Now, the really old RVs, dealers tend to stay away from those because of all kinds of different issues as far as trying to find parts and that kind of thing. So there's still a pretty brisk private sale market for the kind of vintage travel trailers, if you want to call them that. But late model used is still pretty scarce out there, and thankfully we're not seeing a ton of people trading in units that because they bought them during the pandemic, at least not yet.
And I think if you do, sorry, Brian, you want to go or?
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I think the demand's still there, Kurt. So I think if you see some people that if it wasn't for them, now that we get out of the pandemic, there's somebody else out there that's waiting for a unit. So I don't think the industry is going to lose any RVs out there on the road. I think we're just going to gain ones that are going to be happy with the getting in the lifestyle.
So you make a good point. Like I agree with you. I don't think, and again, what I don't know about the RV industry is math, right? I'm learning show by show. But I think you're right that I don't think you're going to lose any of those campers. But my overall question is let's focus on behavior for a second. So does the inventory shortage, let's just start there, right? Does that change the behavior of consumers as far as what they're buying, how they're camping, what they're doing, even if it's just temporarily? In other words, if I'm a buyer, do I purchase that big RV and do I wait 6 months or however long it takes to get it, or longer in the case of an Airstream? Do I temporarily buy an entry-level unit? Do I just not go camping for 6 months? What am I doing?
Yeah, I think if you're buying, let's say, something that's going to be out. I've had a few dealers tell me this. Their consumer's not going to get the product for a year or two, and if they really want to go camping, they're going to buy something that's a little bit cheaper, a little bit more affordable, maybe lower, maybe a towable versus motorized, because they really do embrace the lifestyle. It's a lifestyle, and they don't want to give that up. The great thing right now in terms of used product is that it does hold its value. So we've been seeing some people that are purchasing not maybe their final model or what they're really wanting, but something kind of in between, and that they'll likely trade that in when their unit comes in from the dealership. So because there's such a demand even for used product, that's kind of the way they're addressing it. And to Kurt's point too, the dealers. We've had some dealers have said, some people have brought their unit back and just decided that, they've tried it and they're going to try to find other vacation options now. But ultimately, they've got other customers that are lined up that are still waiting. So it's a great opportunity for them for that used product.
Okay. And then what about other consumer behavior, right? So not just the purchase of the vehicles, but is the impact of, and I know gas prices is on the minds of everybody, right? And how inflation overall is going to impact this, but I feel like we've talked about that enough. But are these people, and we have an audience of campground owners too, right? So are these people still going, maybe they're downgrading, maybe they're upgrading, are they going glamping in the interim? Are they staying in cabins? Are they utilizing tents? Do we have any sense of that? Is there an inventory shortage? Is that impacting purchase behavior? I mean, we obviously know above sites is what I mean. Sorry, an inventory shortage of campsites.
Well, there's a definite shortage of I guess, campsites. People are going to have to, shop around a little bit more. But if I'm hearing your question, is the shortage perhaps of travel trailers and inventory, meaning that people are going and they still want to camp, they don't have a unit yet, are they going glamping? Is that part of your question too?
Are they still staying in the industry is what because we have campgrounders who are watching the show, and what I'm admittedly trying to do is we're having a broader discussion about the RV industry, outdoor rec, but we still are very cognizant of the fact that we have owners on here, right? And so I want to tie in the industry a little bit and not necessarily reassure owners, because I think that the demand is already huge and it's not going down anytime soon, and they're all if you're doing any kind of marketing, you're having huge success filling every park. But are they still going, like, are they putting off their camping lifestyle? I think if you've already had an RV, like Eleanor said, that's a lifestyle you have, you don't want to give up. But if I'm new and this is my first purchase, big, small, whatever it is, am I putting my camping on hold, or am I still going? And maybe Shane, you can speak to that more than anybody else, being CRVC too.
Yeah, I think they're still going for sure. And if for those campground owners, they're probably seeing their rental units in the glamping, be it a tent or a wagon or whatever they have. The demand for those is going way up, because I think the interest of everybody throughout this is to get outdoors and spend more time with their family. And if they don't have an RV, then they still want to go camping and take advantage of something that's already on site, be it whatever rental unit that the campground may have.
I mean, I think I expected that answer. Sorry, Eleanor, go ahead.
I was going to say there's also an opportunity, in terms of the rental units themselves, not necessarily those that are at the campground, but we have a large, rental industry, and that's just grown over the last 5 years with peer-to-peer rentals as well. So, if I can't find a unit from a rental company, or I'm not going to be getting my unit for however many months, there are a lot of, peer-to-peer companies that will allow you to have access to a variety of different units in different places over the season. So I still think that consumers will be out there and will be going to the campgrounds.
That's a good point. So you're talking about the RV Easies, the RV Shares, the Outdoorsies, there's lots of other companies. I'm just calling out the people that I know off the top of my head, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was in the back of my head. I just didn't put those. Yeah, you're right. So
I think, Brian, one thing I can toss in there is, because of this increased demand, whether it's, sales are up 60% or whatnot. Finding a campground, at least in the park system or the federal lands in the U.S., is a challenge because there is such great demand, and more national park campgrounds and a lot of Bureau of Land Management and maybe even Forest Service campgrounds are moving to recreation.gov. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's an internet portal which draws as many complaints as praise in terms of ease of booking a site. It's really, really hard because of the different internet service vagaries that you have out there in terms of speed. If you have a fiber optics line, you'll be able to get a big jump on everybody else in terms of reserving a campsite. We get so many complaints at National Parks Traveler about, I clicked at 8 o'clock to get that campsite and they said it was full. So that's a real issue. I do think, in light of the crowds going to the national parks here in the United States, more people are going to be looking to other public lands and, Forest Service lands and whatnot, and even boondocking, if they've got the capabilities to do that. I have noticed at least one park in the United States, Great Basin National Park, is upgrading one of its campgrounds to add more RV sites. And they're going through the public comment process right now. But I think you're looking at adding, 40 to 50 foot pull-through sites and with some hookups. I don't think it'll be a full hookup, but with some. And it'll be curious to watch to see if other parks start to do the same thing. I know not all park superintendents want to enlarge their campsites, their campgrounds, but in parks where it's possible and where they're open to it, we might see more space available.
Well, you bring up a good point too with behavior, right, Kurt? And maybe you can speak to this, maybe you can. I don't know if you've done any research, you've come across any articles, but as we talk about inventory purely from a private campground perspective normally, because that's just what I deal with more than anything else, if you look at it from a national park perspective, as these national parks, the popular ones especially, have already started to fill up, and there was an inventory shortage long before COVID, I feel like it's some of the more popular ones. But is that behavior shifting them to other national parks that are lesser known? Is it pushing them toward different types of public lands, toward boondocking? Or is it pushing them toward private campgrounds? Do you have a sense of that behavior?
Not really. I can tell you that the National Park Service is concerned about where people are going. Last year, I think there was 300 million visitors to the U.S. National Park System, and 50% of those visitors went to just 25 parks. The Yellowstones, the Grand Tetons, the glaciers. And so there's a real concern from the National Park Service that we've got to get these people to move around. It's overloading, a handful of parks while these other parks that are just as wonderful are going without. And so there's a concern from the Park Service to try and encourage that movement. And here at the Traveler, we're trying to do that too by writing more stories about, overlooked gems, as we call them.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that, because certainly through our national organization, Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, we are encouraging visitors to lesser known national parks. And, another hidden gem, if you will, are the state park systems out there across the country. Many wonderful state parks that are underutilized in places like Indiana, Minnesota, Iowa, that really, not only are they great places to stay for the RVer, but it also is a economic driver for those local communities, and really helps support rural economic development, which is a huge thing in the United States Congress as we see the economic growth around cities and suburban areas outpace that of rural areas. So I think that's something incumbent of all of us in outdoor recreation, is to get the word out that you don't have to go to the marquee parks. There are other places to go throughout the U.S. to enjoy your RV or more rustic camping experience.
I'm wondering, it's in Canada's the same, but is the budgets from some of these national parks, are they so small that instead of us asking or the consumers asking where they can go, shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't it be the park saying, come to us and advertise, hey, we got room?
Well, that's what recreation.gov is supposed to be facilitating, right, Kurt? I mean, one of the big reasons that they had a big overhaul here within the last couple of years is to make it easier to disperse the demand across a wider variety of parks. And certainly through the Great American Outdoors Act, the funding is available to expand and maintain these campgrounds that maybe weren't up to par for RVers and other campers. So, but a lot of it comes from the park and what their plans are and what the park superintendent wants to do. And I think as more success stories about, one thing about RVs is, it's not the dispersed camping where, you don't necessarily know where everybody's going sometimes. If it's done properly on public lands, you can really plan for the use, which not only is a better experience for the end user, but also saves the resources, right? Because you don't have people just randomly camping where maybe it's not as appropriate to camp.
If I could get down into the weeds a little bit, Shane, the National Park Service is not authorized to market. They don't have a public relations arm. They can't go out there and tell you to go visit the Fort Laramie's or the tall grass prairies of the national park system. That's not part of their mission, which seems kind of odd, I know. In terms of funding, the Great American Outdoors Act has done a great job so far. It's funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into the park system, much of it going to some of the brand name parks. And as much as Congress got behind the Great American Outdoors Act a couple of years ago to try and address the maintenance backlog, I think it provides $6.5 billion, Phil, is that right, over 5 years. At the time, the backlog was $12 or $13 billion. The Park Service stopped telling us what that backlog was, which is another curious move. But in the latest federal budget bill approved by Congress, the National Park Service, which is overwhelmed with visitors, got just a 3% increase in operations budget, 2.9%. And they're drastically down in staffing to, provide the ranger interpretive programs in many of these parks. And so it's a real dilemma. They've got incredible visitation. People want to get out there and see the parks and learn about the parks. And Congress is not providing the necessary funding and resources to the Park Service for that.
So one of the things I want to touch on here, just because we've got a lot of private campground owners, and Jacob Marler put a question in here, do people just start using the vast amount of, this is Canada, for example, Crown land available in Canada or BLM in the United States, instead of using traditional campgrounds? Now, Phil and I, we've had this conversation a little bit on the phone before, and I know, Kurt, you've brought it up before with either me or on a show, I can't remember where, but I feel like this inventory shortage is actually a great thing for the entire industry. Obviously, we need more sites. We want to build them. We want more campers, all those kinds of things. Not from that perspective, but from the whole industry is interconnected together. And I'm sure you guys can touch on this briefly, much better than I can. But the private campground industry is not being replaced by national parks, replaced by the Great American Outdoors Act, replaced by public lands and boondocking. I think there's different types of RVers going different places. I think the National Parks Service and public lands and state parks are feeding both private campgrounds and those places. And so do either you gentlemen or Eleanore or Shane want to touch on how that kind of all works together and they complement each other versus compete?
Well, I'll just make a comment. I had a conversation yesterday with one of our members, and the problem is that more campgrounds are going to seasonal sites, and you're not seeing the transient business, which is really concerning to me, and I'm sure Eleanor too, because not everybody wants to, be seasonal. People want to travel around, and so if those transient sites aren't available at campgrounds, they need to find something else and another place to go. And Crownland for sure. You know, Harvest hosts another experience. There's a Quebec firm called, I believe it's Terrigo. They were in our show and they said their business was booming there. So people need to find different experiences. Not, you know, being at, you know, the Campground Association, I don't want to dissuade people from going to our great campgrounds, but if they're full, we need to, you know, find, you know, alternative experiences to, you know, to kind of move people around.
Yeah.
Well, that's ultimately. Go ahead, Eleanor.
I was gonna say, yeah, and the Crown Land, I mean, it's really going to depend on where you're at and what's available. I mean, there are opportunities to camp there. I think you know, you can camp on Crown Land, I think up to 14 days. So you know, at least in the province of British Columbia, you know, I think depending on who oversees it. So there's definitely some opportunities. And generally that type of camper may be very different than a camper that wants to stay in you know, resort facilities that has you know, pools and activities for children. So it's definitely an opportunity that I think our industry can perhaps tap into a little bit better. And I don't see it as necessarily competing with the private campground operators.
Well, and that's the thing. I don't think any, and I'm going to be bold and say I don't think any of us do. But and like Shane, you're talking about this fine line you walk, and I see it in the Facebook groups too. I think the overwhelming majority, just speaking from a U.S. perspective for a second, is that the Great American Outdoors Act is a phenomenal piece of legislation. Is great, is amazing, is whatever. But I think there's also a lot of concern from probably a lack of knowledge standpoint that this money is just intended to compete with private campgrounds, and I think I feel like I know it's not. Is that correct, Phil?
Well, certainly that's not the intent, to compete with private campgrounds.
Right.
You know, one of the things that we've been talking about is the diversity of experiences that people want. And as more campgrounds go to seasonal type models, you know, there's going to be a vacuum in the market for the transient business. And so what's happening? You know, that's how Harvest Host fills a need. That's how the state parks say, well, we can be in this business as well. Even local economic development authorities and things like that are getting into campground, the campground business, if you will, because there's either not enough capacity in the area, or the campgrounds there are full and are doing the seasonal stuff. So, you know, I think look, the RV buyer, I don't know of anybody, you know, I'm sure there are people like this, but say, oh, I only go to private. Oh, I only go to public. You know, they're going for a reason. And so they'll go, and they're going to be outside. So they'll go to private if it works for them that time, or they'll go to a public campground if it works for them another time. So the idea of the scarcity mentality, I'm not sure I understand it, but I'm not sure it's the really that well placed. I think there's a room enough for everybody and all the different types of camping that people want to do.
Well, I agree with you in that, like, I understand this is kind of an uncomfortable, I don't know what to say question, right? And it is for me too, because I deal with a lot of these private campgrounds. But I think that's what I'm trying to just kind of hammer home here, is that there is some overlap, right? But it's not a competition among each other, especially because, again, we've talked about different amenities, different types of campers, different behavior. People are doing both, you know, maybe one here, one there. But also the national parks, and Kurt, I want to ask you, I have a question for you in a second, but the national parks and the public lands and those attractions are feeding the private campgrounds that surround them as well, not just from an inventory shortage standpoint, from people who want to see the national park, but maybe want more amenities like a pool and things like that. And so part of my goal with creating this RV industry show and having you guys on it is to deepen the ties of everybody's relationship with each other and see that all the work that you're doing feeds everything else. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, you know, and in a way, if I'm a private campground owner and I'm full, And I have all these customers coming to me looking for sites, and I keep on having to tell them that I'm sorry, I'm full. They're going to get upset and maybe leave the industry. So maybe I'm not full and I don't have those customers anymore. So my point is, it's good to have alternatives out there for from the viewpoint of a private campground owner, because okay, I'm doing really well and I'm full. I want to still take care of my prospective customers, so I'm glad to see them find alternative places to go, if that makes any sense.
And I think one of the things too that they're, that I understand campground owners, they don't like unfair competition, right? Where it's not market-based pricing or whatever. So, and certainly I think the RV industry and the private campground industry have helped educate the public campground people about, that this is a sensitive topic. And so there is a way for everybody to gain from this, but we do have to work together to understand the long game versus the short game, of, okay, well, I lost some camper nights or whatever because of a public campground in the area. We need to have a good dialogue on that. And certainly I think that is happening now more than ever. And the other thing I think too is allowing private campground operators to operate on public lands as well, getting rid of the red tape that prevents that kind of activity, where, you've got the professional private campground actually operating the campground on the public property is another way to get kind of through this whole dilemma that we face.
Yeah, I think part of it also is education and information. Everybody wants to go to the national parks, and so the national park websites are really, hit by a wide range of the public looking for things to do. Are the Forest Service websites the same thing? Are they attracting that type of attention? What about the BLM lands? And up in Canada, there's probably the same situation going on out there. As I mentioned during our last show a month ago, we're working on a RVing guide to the national park system. And the writer who's been working with me on it said, well, what about neighboring lands, Forest Service campgrounds and whatnot, BLM campgrounds close to national parks? And right now, that's a little bit more than I want to chew off on, just because there are over 250 campgrounds in the national park system that have RV spaces available that we're trying to provide all the up-to-date information on that. At the same time, we are open to taking advertisements of, say, the KOA outside the park or the other privately owned campground. We want to be a conduit for information where when you go to the national park or recreation.gov and find that your campground is full for the next 6 months, we want to be able to tell people, well, here's another option that you can look at. And I think that's really valuable. A lot of the Park Service sites do point to surrounding communities and camping operations there. I'm planning a road trip this summer, driving out to Iowa from Utah and back through Kansas and Colorado. And, some of the parks I want to go visit at, they don't have campgrounds, but they have a link to the local lodging possibilities. And so I just think greater knowledge and information that's out there would help disseminate some of these crowds and open up their eyes to some of these other wonders. I mean, Phil, you're absolutely right about the state campgrounds. I know state parks, Snow Canyon State Park in Utah is gorgeous. It should be part of the national park system. I think we should take it over.
Well, I think some of that is good advice for private park owners too, where you're talking about with the Forest Service websites and BLM lands advertising local private campgrounds too in some cases. If they don't know you exist, then they can't advertise you, right? And so you as a private park owner, maybe you need to be doing some outreach to some of these places and reaching out to, I don't know who the contact would be, if that's a national, state, whatever level that is, obviously depending on the park, but seeing if you can get a partnership going where if they don't have a campground that they're putting you there and recommending you, or even if they do, as an alternative or something like that. But Kurt, I want to give you a couple minutes to talk about outdoor rec in general. What are some things that discount RVing and camping for a second, but just what are some of the things that are exciting you in the national park system that may end up exciting people to want to travel to those specific areas and in turn feed to camping?
Boy, that's a tough question.
I know that's a
can't get back
open-ended, just putting
next
you on the
month.
spot question, right? But
I mean, there's a lot of discussion going on in the Park Service and in some corners of Congress about how to deal with this visitation and how to spread it out. What's exciting to me is how the Great American Outdoors Act dollars are going to work. I mean, maybe it's just that the Biden administration is better at promoting what's going on out there in public lands versus the Trump administration. But just about every week I'm hearing about a project that is funded by the Great American Outdoors Act. And they're not all dollars going to the big parks. A lot of the smaller parks are starting to see some benefits. One thing we might see later this year, and Big Bend is kind of in the middle between the small park and the big parks. I mean, it's big acreage wise, but it only saw, I think, about 530,000 visitors last year versus almost 5 million for Yellowstone. But they're looking at getting funding to build a new lodge, to replace a lodge that has some structural deficiencies to it because of geological processes. And so I think, there's a lot of attention being focused on the Park Service with the new director out there. How can we better deal with this visitation? And I'm hoping that Congress really gets behind the realization that the Park Service doesn't have the staff in all the corners to deal with this visitation.
Well, so let me rephrase the question maybe and try to get to where I was going. And maybe, Phil, you want to touch on this a little bit with ORR, with your work there. Let's stick with Great American Outdoors Act for a second. Let's say to Phil, and if you know anything, and to Kirk, since you write so many articles, what are some places where you've seen dollars go from the Great American Outdoors Act that you feel will increase visitation to those specific areas in 2022 and beyond?
Well, I know.
Go ahead, Kurt. Well, I've seen some overall numbers, and I look at them with my RV glasses on, if you will. A lot of and I'm going to get an update on this next week at our Outdoor Recreation Roundtable board meeting, but from what I like to see is access is one of the big things as far as road improvements in parking lots, and campground facilities like water systems that are very, very important to protect the resource. For instance, in Shenandoah National Park, just a few years ago, the largest campground there was shut down all summer long because it had a sewer failure. So, those are the kind of things that are really important to fix, and that's what the Great American Outdoors Act is helping to accelerate. And Kurt's right. I mean, you're seeing almost weekly announcements from all corners of the national park system, some in the forest system as well, talking about improvements that they're making to various recreational facilities, all due to the Great American Outdoors Act. And I think, if there's one thing in Congress that people can agree on, it is, protecting the national public lands and maintaining them. And hopefully we'll move some other legislation later on this year, even though it's an off-year election year. It's still a very bipartisan type of activity to fund the National Park Service and other public lands.
One thing I think people need to be aware of also is, with this money going into the parks to repair things, it is going to impact access. A perfect example is Yellowstone National Park, where they're going to be rebuilding 2 bridges and doing some road work. And it's the 150th anniversary of Yellowstone. People are excited about that. They want to go see the park. And if you're coming in from the south entrance, you're going to have some delays as they replace a major bridge inside the park there. at Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, they're talking about doing some significant upgrades, or not upgrades, but replacing old water pipelines and whatnot in the biggest campground in Rocky Mountain National Park. And so you're going to see some impacts there. So across the park system, as these dollars go to work, I mean, it is going to lead to road delays, time delays, possibly fewer campsites in the campgrounds.
So let's take a couple minutes here at the end of the show, and maybe the question goes to Canada too. Even though right now we're talking about the Great American Outdoors Act, so I'll finish up with US with Phil and Kurt. If I'm a private park owner, how do I follow this news about the Great American Outdoors Act in general? And I know obviously we can do a better job on Modern Campground of that, but other sources, National Parks Traveler, of course, is covering all these things much more comprehensively than we are. How do I stay up to date with these announcements? And then how do I use those announcements to my advantage? And I don't mean it to sound selfish, but how do I use it? In some ways it is. How do I use those to market my park better, to take advantage of that interest of the bigger like Shenandoah, right? Of the bigger park, of the wider roads, of the better, access at all these places, to then drive more interest to my private campground?
Well, Kurt, you probably could answer that better than I can as far as monitoring what's going on. Our experience has been that it's very decentralized, the announcements coming out of the various park districts, ranger districts for the Forest Service.
No, you're absolutely right. It is pretty decentralized. And in fact, this morning, just before I got on the phone with you guys, I got an email from a park superintendent wondering if I was on their media distribution list. And so there is a disconnect there. Interior Department does a pretty good job of sending out notices of projects that are well funded. But you raise an interesting question, Brian, and I'm not so sure about marketing, but Yellowstone last year saw, as I mentioned, nearly 5 million visitors. And in parsing those numbers, they realized that a lot of those visitors, and not a majority, but a lot of them, were staying outside the park, at campgrounds outside the park, at lodges outside the park, and coming in for day trips. And I think if I was a private campground owner next to Yellowstone, I would certainly promote the fact that Yellowstone's alive and is beautiful, but you have to be aware that there's some serious construction going on, and if you stay with us, you can avoid some of that construction and be more strategic in how you visit Yellowstone.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Obviously, Yellowstone is way easier. But if I know somebody is increasing access to a small little state park or a federal land or a BLM or something near me that has a really beautiful river running through it or a couple hiking trails or whatever, that's what I mean. Like, how do I, as a private campground owner, find that information, one, and then take advantage of it in my communications to my campers, my potential guests, my marketing, to say that this is happening, which feeds the park system too, right? And the whole RV industry, and more people it all goes together. But how do I do that to my benefit while also benefiting these public lands that are getting the funding?
Well, here at the Traveler, we're a journalism organization. We make our living writing stories, and in the past, we've had organizations help us write those stories by helping fund us. I mean, they give us a grant for $10,000 or $20,000, and here's what we're going to write about. And I would love to find some money to help us better promote some of these smaller parks out there that people aren't aware of and don't realize the beauty or the history or the interpretation that goes on there in the surrounding landscapes. As I mentioned, I'm going on a road trip this summer, but that's just one aspect. I'm just going to be able to hit 4 parks, and if the Park Service were ever to get into the advertising business, I would go after some dollars there to write about some of these other places. I mean, there's 424 units in the national park system, and to have 50% of 300 million people go to just 25, it's a disservice to those individuals who are unaware of what else exists out there.
Okay, so obviously, Kurt and I, we have a not a long history, but we've known each other for a couple of years, and so we've talked about your funding before, and absolutely, we 100% agree with you. Like, the more you can cover, the better. But I think what we're all getting at is, like, if the National Park Service, or at least I am thinking in my head. I don't want to put words in anybody else's mouth, but if the National Park Service doesn't have a PR arm, then maybe that falls to places like National Parks Traveler, like Modern Campground to a much lesser extent, but National Parks Traveler and other places to raise awareness of these things. And so I think that benefits private campgrounds. I think that benefits certainly the RV industry as a whole. Phil and Eleanor, if you would agree with that, right? Are you expanding your coverage in Canada, Phil? Or Kurt? Sorry.
Yeah, we are. We are. A year ago, we actually got a Canadian editor, and she's been doing a great job in raising awareness of some national parks. And to that point of what you mentioned earlier, we got a grant from Nova Scotia to promote the national parks in that province. And we just come to the end of that. And hopefully we did raise awareness. I know we've increased the Canadian traffic to the Traveler. And I'd like to build on that, not just in Canada, but in Europe and South America, Central America, Asia. Yeah.
Awesome. So, and then I just want to, Shane and Eleanor, I know we've been talking about a lot about the Great American Outdoors Act, but same kind of question to you guys. How do and maybe Shane more, this is sorry, Eleanor, maybe this is more of a question for Shane. But how do you then, same question to you, Shane, for private campgrounds, how do they find out what's going on with public lands improvements, crown land, things like that, to take advantage of, marketing their park better to the people who might want to visit these areas?
Yeah, I think information for them is sporadic. They just have to be aware of what's going on around them. For example, Parks Canada had their 150th year anniversary, and where they gave away free Parks Canada passes a few years ago, which created a big overflow for Parks Canada, especially around the Banff area, where people were going there, they just couldn't find a site. So, private campground owners should be aware of what's happening around them, and if they're around a public park, and especially in those areas where they get a lot of traffic, kind of maybe work with the public park, or just make sure they get the word out that, hey, we're open if you can't find anything there. So
awesome.
But as far as other, I'm not aware of anything else up here. Are you, Eleanor?
Well, no, I mean, I would just say make sure that you go to the Parks Canada website, because they always have what they're doing, what their activities are. They do have a whole section on accommodations and what's happening this particular year. There are other things too, is that I would say that most of, we have Destination Canada, which markets Canada to the world. There's Destination British Columbia in BC. There's some municipal marketing boards as well. So, maybe campground operators could get in touch with some of those marketing boards and destination organizations that help promote, and sort of it's a collective, so it could be more cost effective, less expensive for, an individual company, but just to be in some of those marketing opportunities to bring traffic into your area and be a part of that as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. I mean, joining your local tourism board, your Chamber of Commerce, your CVB, or what you're talking about, all those destination marketing organizations, because to our point, right? They are promoting both private campgrounds who are their members, and national parks and local attractions and museums, and they're helping drive that. And so obviously they're probably following all that news too, and so that's a good source of information. But ultimately, it's awareness, and so I think that it sounds like to me that we need to get some more funding for National Parks Traveler if we can. But in general, Kurt's doing a great job. And the more he can raise awareness, the more the RV industry, the private campground owners are benefiting. And then obviously, I think we can do a better job on modern campground too, not covering national parks specifically, because that's Kurt, but doing a better job of maybe highlighting some of the things the Great American Outdoor Act is doing, and some of the other improvements and things like that to camping specifically. But are you up for the challenge, Kurt? Can we do this? Can we do a better job? All right.
I'm trying to spend money as fast as I can. So the more writers I can put to work telling these stories, the happier I'll be.
Awesome. Well, if we can move more RVs, then Eleanor and Phil will be happy, and so will Shane, right? So.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, any closing thoughts before we wrap up the show? I know we kind of went all over the place. I didn't really have a plan for today, but I think it turned out fairly well. We had a pretty nice discussion.
Mm-hmm. No, the only thought I have is just to wish Brian a happy birthday again.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Just another day, but super excited to be here on the show as always. Thank you guys. Really appreciate you joining us and committing to us once a month here. We'll see you all in another month or so. But just as a reminder, we are also available as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, all those kinds of places. So if you can listen to our show afterwards, if you missed it, also archives of our show on MC Fireside Chats. We had a lot of good discussions. Kurt's been a repeat guest. Phil and Eleanore have been here a couple times. So make sure you go back, check out their conversations. And just, again, all of us are tied together. All of us are working together. All of us feed each other, the RV industry, to the outdoor rec, to the national parks, to the public lands, to the private campgrounds, to everybody. And the more that we're aware of what everybody else is doing, the more we can help each other continue to succeed, even beyond what we're already doing independently. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of MC Fireside Chats, hosted by Brian Searl and Cara Csizmadia. Have a suggestion for a future show or want to see your campground or company as part of an episode? Email us at hello@moderncampground.com. Join us next week for another episode. And don't miss the latest outdoor hospitality news and commentary from around the world at moderncampground.com.